Apple Knocker Radio.
All right, Seven. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great.
All right.
And how are you?
I am very good, except that I busted my foot earlier while I was going out to rescue my Venus flytraps from being drowned. I smashed my foot up pretty good, but life goes on. So I really was looking forward to this conversation, very much looking forward to this interview because I love your book and I really love your art. And I'm hoping that I want to get in. Obviously, we need to talk about your book. That is the primary objective. But I also would love to talk a little bit about your art, just because I find it really fascinating and really beautiful. So let me ask first. You were primarily an artist who decided to undertake this mission to write this book. So my first question would be, number one, why? What prompted you to do that? And number two, what was the experience like, and how was it different in a notable way from your visual art?
Yeah. Well, when I would paint, a lot of ideas would come to me. Symbols, messages, little clues from spirit, that I would really want to understand and integrate. And so I would just take copious notes. I studied a lot, read a lot, trying to understand and kind of put these puzzle pieces together that were coming through visually in my art. And in the process, I started to accumulate a lot of written material. And also at the same time, I was developing a very magical practice centered around creativity and around my art. And I wanted to understand more of where that came from. I was really interested in the Golden Dawn and Aleister Crowley. And, I wanted to understand where these different magical practices came from and where occultism in general was rooted. And so all of this was kind of coalescing at the same time. And I would write these different pieces about specific paintings and in an attempt to, for myself, just to understand what these symbols meant and how they fit together into a cohesive unity.
So the symbol came to you first and then the research came out. Well, that's going to come back to later questioning, but please go ahead.
Yeah, often the symbol would come first, usually through dreams. That's been a big influence in my art. Sometimes just messages through nature or, things that come up in conversation with people. And I'm always listening, for these messages. And so when I get enough of them and they sort of cohere into a vision, then I can begin a painting. But there's this other part of me that really wants to understand and to also share this information with other people, share what I'm learning along the way. So that's really the spirit that the book was born out of. And it didn't feel so much like a conscious decision. It was just what I needed to do for my own understanding. But then it's, over time, it became something that I really wanted to share with people. And as all of these writings started to accumulate, and as my research went deeper, and I was learning more and more about Hermeticism and Hermetism and alchemy and astrology, people around me would express a lot of interest and ask questions. And so I wanted to share this information and present it in a way that other people could learn and integrate as well.
And so I want to go back to that idea of the images came to you first.
Mm-hmm.
That's really fascinating because something that struck me in reading your book and looking at your art is that you're carrying on an ancient tradition. I mean, back in the day, a lot of these ideas were transmitted through visual art, and the uninitiated didn't even know what it was. You know what I mean? Like it would take later scholars to figure out what these images were.
Yeah.
But it just makes me curious. Do you think that has been the foundation for this tradition of alchemical and hermetic symbolism in art? Did it always start with the image, or did it start with the knowledge or the study?
Well, that's interesting. It makes me think of the first book of the Corpus Hermeticum, which is the main body of Hermetic writings. It's like 17 treatises that are written as these dialogues between a teacher and a student or an initiate. the first book is called The Pomandrous, and it begins with a vision. And it's basically a vision that is being presented to Hermes of the birth of the universe and the cosmos and creation of everything and of humanity. And so that to me says that, yeah, I think a lot of times it did begin with a vision. And I think that's one of the primary ways that the divine mind communicates with us. Not just through vision, but sometimes through words, through celestial messengers and things like that. But I think vision is one of the primary ways.
What do you think it is that made you susceptible or open to these to this transmission? Do you think it was anything in your childhood, or is this something that you've experienced since your childhood? I guess would be a good place to start.
Yeah, I was always very visually inclined as a child, always looking for kind of magical, unseen things, really interested in things that would get me to see reality in a different way, I remember we had this old Ford van when I was growing up, and the ceiling of it was just covered with these dots, in a very orderly pattern. But I would just lay there and stare up at them until my eyes did this kind of magical thing where the dots would become completely three-dimensional and things like that, just wanting to access different ways of seeing reality. And I remember as a adolescent, for the first time just looking at a dark wall and kind of noticing color, like pixels of color and just like an energy field, and I didn't know what it was at the time, but I noticed it and I thought to myself, like, that's definitely there. I'm definitely seeing that. It doesn't really change what's underneath it. Reality is the same, but I'm seeing this kind of veil of pixelated color.
And about what age was this?
Probably like 13.
Okay.
And I just wondered to myself why nobody talked about that, what it was and why nobody talked about it. And that kind of stuck with me. And throughout my teens, I became really interested in altered states and entheogens. And that really opened things up for me and helped me understand and experience energy and what energy was. And eventually, that gave way to a more spiritual, grounded path. But yeah, I've always been very visual. I was super creative as a kid, drew a lot. Yeah.
But those initial visual experiences, those preceded your experimentation with psychotropic drugs. Yeah.
Yeah.
And do you still experience that?
Yeah, occasionally. And I mean, when I meditate or after a good yoga session, I'll often see visual energies, colors and things like that. And I've learned how to work with them and sort of, integrate what they're trying to show me and teach me.
You know how many people would be envious of that? Envious that you get to see this spiritual interplay that, so many people their whole lives, they commit to practices to try to actually directly experience something like that. So that's a pretty amazing gift.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think most of us are capable of it, with practice. But then again, some of us are more visual. Some of us are not very visual, There's plenty of people that have a hard time visualizing things in their imagination, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's different ways to connect with the spiritual realm. It doesn't necessarily have to be through visions.
I would imagine that to some extent, at least, that has to have directed the course of your life when you're living in a world where you are kind of not living in the world of the people around you, like you're experiencing something different. Would you say that was true?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I always felt a little bit, separate from people around me, and wondered how much people really perceived in comparison to what I was perceiving. Yeah. But also it's just created this, deep desire in me to be able to express what I see and to give it form and to share it with the world, because I do see it as a gift. And I don't think I have like very exceptional powers of vision, but I'd like to be able to convey what I do experience and see in a way that other people can benefit from.
So how does that actually come together in your artistic process? Like with one of your pieces, I'm sure there isn't a standard way that every painting comes together, but is there a general kind of flow to how the initial impulse comes and then how the final product develops?
Well, there's a couple of different ways that a painting will come through for me. And one of the ways is, I like to think of it as sort of being possessed or obsessed with a certain idea. And often it begins with a dream. Very often I'll have a very significant dream of an animal or a figure or situation or a place. And it'll just create this curiosity in me and a desire to know more and to integrate and to understand. So that begins sort of a long process far before the painting ever begins, of what I like to call just an extended meditation. And during this time, I'm contemplating the symbols that have come to me. And along the way, more symbols end up coming to me, and I make these connections and, looking at planetary sympathies and correspondences, and through study and contemplation and time spent in nature, dreaming again. So all of this kind of starts to come together. And during this time, I'm taking notes. I'm thinking about symbols, visual symbols that might portray what I'm learning. And eventually there's a sort of culmination of all of this. And often it comes very quick when it does come. And I'll just sort of see the composition of the painting or like some of the main elements. And then I can start sketching and like working it out. And this is sort of more of my linear process. So in this case, it's a process of integration. And so I tend to use more structure in a painting, and I'll like lay a foundation of sacred geometry that pertains to the symbols, and then fit the composition of the different figures that are going to be in the painting into that geometry. And then I like to conceal the geometry a little bit, so it's not just like a flower of life or whatever. So yeah, that's a more linear process. Still based in dream and intuition and this sort of magical practice. But I also like to work directly from the unconscious in the way that the surrealists would, so letting the rational mind just take a back seat and allowing the unconscious to spontaneously express itself like you would with stream of consciousness writing. It's like automatic painting or automatic drawing. You basically get out of the way and just let whatever wants to come through. And so if I'm starting a painting like that, I'll often just lay a ground of like one pigment over a canvas or a panel. And then I'll just very spontaneously and vigorously just rub away at it with a rag until there's all these like shadows and light areas and kind of patterns laid out. And that gives me something to work with. I can gaze into it sort of like an oracle, and like wait for images to appear to me. And that's the unconscious speaking to me. And often it's very bizarre, unexpected, surprising. And that's just the best. I love that. And so then I can kind of, work to develop those images and bring them to life. And, from there, once I have those kind of basic forms and figures determined, then I can give them more realism, referencing images and stuff like that to give it a more realistic, lifelike appearance.
And so when the final product is done and you've fished through what was being transmitted to you or the inspiration, do you find that you tend to walk away from it with like understanding the definitive message that was being sent to you in that one thing, or is it not that compartmentalized?
Well, it's interesting because yes and no. There often is a general message that I get at the end of a painting, an understanding. And I have a Patreon And so one of the things that I do for my patrons are these artistic vision posts. And so this sort of helps me to consolidate the message that comes through. And I'll write a post that kind of goes into my process with the painting and the symbols and what those symbols might mean, and just sort of a general interpretation that I've given to the painting. But at the same time, my paintings, they tend to reveal their meanings to me slowly over time. And the meanings can change also, you know. So while I do find meaning and understanding at the completion of a painting, I don't take that as like the be all end all of what that painting has to say. And I'm also really interested in what other people think about a painting, you know, more so than what I think. You know, I'm interested in how it affects people and what it brings up for them.
So you mentioned that you were dealing with these, you were working with these images that were coming through to you for a while before it occurred to you to like start researching and find out what they mean. Do you recall like a first like aha moment where something had come to you and then you found it connected to some kind of ancient esoteric symbol or anything of that nature?
Well, I feel like that's been such a part of every painting. I don't know if I can pinpoint an exact moment.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
So it still happens now, even though you have immersed yourself in the ancient symbolism, symbology, and you are still surprised.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah. Still surprised. Yeah.
Man, that's got to be an addictive feeling. Yeah, that creative rush, and then to find out that it's something really speaking to you, or at least that you're connected to a collective unconscious, or something is coming through to you, right?
Yeah.
That's just got to be a thrilling way to live.
It is. It's very magical. And that was part of the inspiration for writing the book too, is I want other people to be able to connect with that and experience that for themselves through the creative process. But, you know, that can be in any manifestation. It doesn't have to be through painting or visual art. We're all creative beings. Just being a human is a creative act, you know. So whether that's through art or through business or whatever it is that we choose to do, we can be creative in that and find a very magical way of life.
I've talked to people, including a couple friends of mine, who feel completely closed off from any kind of creativity, and it actually bothers them. You know, like there's one person I'm thinking of in particular who has a really hard time imagining clear visual imagination or being a very creative person. And what would you say to people of that nature? I mean, it's largely what your book goes into. But could you explain here a little bit in a little condensed version, how somebody like that could go about tapping into this wellspring of inspiration?
Yeah, I think there's a number of ways that we can connect with that part of ourselves. And one of the main ways that I would recommend, which is very accessible to most people, is just spend time in nature to create space and stillness within the self. Because if we're full of ourselves, full of information, full of busyness, like there's no space for that creative spiritual energy to move through us. And so creating more space and spending time in natural environments and giving yourself time to contemplate and to just be, you know. So I think that's really fundamental. But also working with dreams. I think a lot of people just they disregard dreams. They don't pay attention, or they have trouble remembering them. That's very common. But if we can train ourselves to get in the habit of both remembering and recording our dreams and listening to what they have to convey to us, it's a rich source of material for creativity. It can be super inspiring, you know, and create a lot of mysterious channels for us to explore, or just reveal those channels to us.
Do you have any tips for how somebody can go about remembering their dreams?
First of all, set the intention that you want to, and keep that intention in your mind when you go to bed. Way to record them, a pen and paper next to your bedside, or you can record them, you know, on a recording device. if it's hard for you to get up and write first thing in the morning. And getting proper sleep, sticking to a regular sleep schedule. There's different tricks. I think some people like to interrupt their deep sleep, their deep REM sleep, and that can be a time for remembering dreams more easily. So like setting alarms for, when you would be in that sort of deep sleep, like around 3 or 4 in the morning. And then I think what would be easiest is like just turning on your recording device and recording any fragments, anything that you can remember, even if it's just the faintest feeling. That's how it begins. You just need to record whatever you have, even if it's just a very subtle impression. And the more you do that, and the more you have that intention of wanting to remember, your unconscious will work with you. It'll communicate. And the more that you're able to write down and record, the more that you'll remember. And that's been my experience. Yeah. And I go through phases myself periods where I don't dream. And that's okay. We can't always be plumbing the depths of the unconscious. Sometimes we just need to live our daily life. And the times when I'm dreaming a lot, it can be a little overwhelming, where I'm writing down 5 pages of dreams and, then trying to interpret them. And it's too much, too much time in the dream world. So there's a balance.
Well, so much of this seems to come with so much of what you just said does come kind of naturally to you. So how did your study and application of Hermetic and alchemical ideas, how has that fueled your both your personal development and your creative process? Since so much of it comes naturally to you, right? Like it's not something you have to work for. So how did that kind of work with your natural process?
Well, I guess I was going through a pretty hard time in my life when I first came into contact with alchemy. And it was alchemy that I came across first before I ever learned about Hermeticism. It was basically like a dark night of the soul. Like nothing made sense. Nothing. All the things that I would do to normally like self-regulate and help myself out, nothing worked.
About what age was this?
This was mid to late 20s.
Okay.
Yeah. Nothing was helping, meditation, yoga, long walks. I would just have these panic attacks no matter what I did, and severe anxiety and depression and self-doubt. And it was at that time that I was beginning to teach myself how to oil paint. And I was just determined to figure it out for myself, and to develop this skill. Because, I knew I had natural talent for art, but as a teenager, I decided I wasn't good and I wasn't good enough, and that it was just a hobby. It was not something I was going to pursue as a life path. And so at this time in my late 20s, I was just sort of opening back up to it and saying, you know what? I do have a natural ability. I don't think I'm very good right now, but I'd like to get better. And so I was teaching myself how to oil paint, and at the same time, just going through this really dark period. And it was at that time that I discovered the alchemical writings of Carl Jung, and the psychological perspective and the combination with alchemy and the world of symbols and the different images that he referred to in there. It just helped me so much to understand what I was going through, because in alchemy, everything begins in the darkness. It all begins in this sort of stage of putrefaction and death and depression and negation of life, and it's this, rich, dark period that everything is birthed out of. And so putting my own situation into that context, I was like, wow, maybe this is an opportunity, maybe I can transmute what's going on inside of me through my art. And that's sort of how my whole creative process was born, was like understanding that, not to be afraid of these dark periods, but to understand that we can really work with them and to embrace them in a way, not to resist, not to indulge and identify with them, but just understand their purpose, So through that, I just became fascinated with alchemy as a subject and read as much as I could about it. And at a certain point realized, like, well, where does this actually come from? And realized that it was rooted in ancient Hermetic teachings and ancient Egypt. And so, yeah, I just kept learning and going deeper, and at the same time developing my art and the sort of creative alchemical practice that I have.
That's really interesting. So now do you, I'm not going to, pry too deeply into exactly what you do, but is it like a concentrated kind of systematic use of alchemy in your art or alchemical hermetic practices? Or is it just more generally that's part of your life and the art is also part of your life?
Well, art and alchemy pretty much are my life. I think about them all the time. And with my art, I'm constantly thinking about alchemical processes of transmutation, and different paintings will sort of represent different processes often. And, during those meditation periods that I described leading up to a painting, I'll be kind of going through these energetic transmutations within myself. And it's through that the paintings are often like given form. But even as the painting is going along, that sort of thing is happening. And yeah, just in life in general, with relationships and other work that I do, and just the day-to-day stuff, I feel like alchemy is an integral part of that. Just understanding that energy is constantly changing and shifting, that there's cycles, death and dissolution and generation and rebirth, all of that. So, if I'm going through a hard time, I don't resist it. I try to just accept it and be with it. And the more that I've done that, the faster that it tends to transform into something else. And then usually after one of those sort of dark, melancholic experiences, there'll be this opening and sort of light at the end of the tunnel, and just like a glimmer of hope, and like that's when the unconscious tends to express itself more in the form of symbols and messages. And I can start to make meaning of what happened in that dark period and what was being generated from that. And then that develops and grows through this gestation period, development, maturation, and eventually that's birthed into form, into a new form of a painting or a poem or a book, Mm-hmm. So I see those stages of alchemy kind of applying to every aspect of life, but especially creatively. And it's not always necessarily linear. I might be in one stage in my personal relationships. I might be in another stage in my painting. I might be in different stages with different paintings. It's dynamic. But,
all right. Well, I'm about to hit you with a big question. I end up asking this of just about all of my guests because it's a huge reason why I started building this channel in the first place. What do you think is the purpose of it? Is there a purpose? Why are these things being transmitted to you? And if you did not make this assumption, but I'm making this assumption, if you were kind of, I don't know if selected is the right term, but if kind of your role in the human ecosystem is to be this channel and create this art that transmits these ideas, and they're not ideas, archetypes. Why? Where is the universe taking Seven? Where is the universe taking Seven's audience? Where is the universe taking all of us? Do you have any ideas about this?
That is a big question.
I know it is, and everyone I ask is always like, "Damn, man, that's a big one." But I gotta know. What do you think?
Well, I mean, ultimately, I don't know. But if I were to conjecture, I think it's just the universal mind seeking to know itself in deeper, more profound ways, and to evolve and to reach higher and higher states of awareness and clarity and realization in this life. this life that we're all sharing. I see us all connected through time and space. And some of us are channels for that information in a bigger way, but we're all channels. We all have our unique windows to the ultimate source of reality and the cosmos, and we're all connected to that. And it's just a matter of how open that channel is. And there's different things we can all do to facilitate that opening. But I feel like the mystery will just keep unfolding before us. The more that we understand, the more it's going to unfold, and there'll just be more and more to discover. I don't think there's any ultimate end to it. And I think the goal is really just gnosis, divine knowledge of the self, of the cosmos, of what reality is and how consciousness and the material world interact. And I mean, it's my hope anyway, my intention that what I'm doing through my art and through my writing will help other people to access that.
That's a great answer. That was a great answer. Have you ever read The Secret History of the World?
No.
It's by Mark Booth. That book has few books that have affected me as much as that book. What Booth claims is that, and he was a man of some stature before he wrote this book, so I don't think he would make this claim unless there was some legitimacy to it, that these things were shared to him, that that this is literally the secret history of the world, which essentially boils down to, it's a very large and complex book, but it essentially boils down to this idea that human consciousness has definitely been evolving in a very profound way throughout time, in that there is this, it's going somewhere, right? And it's actually very similar to what you just said. It's actually almost identical to what you just said. So I really appreciate your answer. I like that. I'm not going to lie, I haven't been able to get The Secret History out of my mind since I read it. And I actually feel like a large part of my own explorations are like trying to validate it almost, because I find it to be a very beautiful and hopeful perspective on things.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Well, I think that's great that your practice is seeking to validate that for yourself. I think that's so important. Anything that we read and take in to understand it for ourselves individually, to have that personal experience of it, not just to believe things, but to be able to experience them for ourselves. That's gnosis.
Right. So do you believe in reincarnation?
I do. Yeah.
Yeah. But that is, to my understanding, that is generally the Hermetic conception, right?
Yeah. There's definitely references to the transmigration of the soul in the Hermetic texts. And I think a lot of Hermeticists ascribe to that. Yeah. So
your own work has, your paintings are very ethereal, surreal. And you work largely out of this world of instinct. Like you said, you had these things that just kind of came to you, artistic inspiration. But your book is written, I mean, it's an academic text, really, because it's full of references, and it's very careful to clarify where it's seven talking and where it's seven referencing information that can be validated by historical sources. And so I'm curious, did that kind of thinking, does that come naturally to you, or did you have to kind of switch to a different part of your brain to bring this book to fruition?
Well, I'm academically trained from college, and have a deep respect for academic writing and scholarly writing. So I think when I read books, I appreciate when things are well researched and well referenced. And I like to be able to look at where people got their ideas and the source material. So I think that was kind of important to me from the get-go. And I considered, I did a little bit as I was getting into it about whether I wanted to write in a scholarly way or in a more intuitive stream of consciousness way. But I just thought about, when I read books and how much more impactful it is if there is that sort of foundation to a book rather than just someone, kind of speaking out of their mind and their heart without any, scholarly references.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted it to have a foundation, and I think it helps balance me out too, because it makes me think about my parents when I was growing up. My mom and my whole mom's side of the family, super creative, all artists, all very in touch with the spiritual realm. And then on my dad's side, there's all these lawyers and doctors and therapists. And my dad was in the military, and very, rational minded people. And those two currents came together in me. And so I have both of those things in me. And my art really expresses that side that I get from my mom. And I think in my writing, that more rational, linear part of me comes out.
I thought it was, I've read many books on the subject, and really I was surprised by that aspect of your book because, when I got the advanced copy, I was aware that you were a visual artist, and I looked at some of your visual art. So it wasn't what I was expecting. And even as somebody who has read as much about the subject, your book is invaluable just as a scholarly work. That would probably actually be one of the biggest things I would recommend to people. If you want a really systematic and thorough breakdown of the history of these ideas, I just think it's a great aspect of your book, which is interesting to me because, like I said, coming from an artist and it's about art essentially, I wasn't expecting that. So yeah, I don't know, just an observation. I just really love that aspect of the book. I thought it was very, very well done.
Well, that's great to hear. Yeah. That's really great to hear. And I wanted to appeal to a wider audience, so people that are, more spiritually inclined, but also more scholarly. And I wanted to find that balance with it. So.
I definitely think you will succeed with that, because I would absolutely recommend the book just for people who are interested to materialists who are interested from a purely philosophical or historical perspective. So, I think you nailed that. So what are you thinking? Are you now going to be Seven Bremner, the author, as well as the artist, or was this a one-off project?
Well, you've only seen the first book, but the second book is going to be coming out in 2023.
Oh, really?
That one's done, but it still needs to go through the editing phase. So I'm waiting to get that back from the publishers so I can take a second stab at it and see what I want to fix up before it goes to print and all of that. But that one is called The Hermetic Marriage of Art and Alchemy. And that one goes even deeper into the 4 stages of the alchemical great work or magnum opus and how that relates to the creative process. So I'm very excited about that one as well. And I have other ideas for subsequent books, but I'm taking a break right now from writing and reading in general. I've just been really excited to be back in the studio and painting again, and in a more intuitive, spontaneous flow with that, because writing it's a different process. It's a very mental, challenging process, and I love it. And I can get super nerdy and really into it. But there was just a lot of pressure with the timing of the books, so deadlines and stuff. And I had to put everything else aside. So I really wasn't painting much during the writing time. And normally I like to have more of a balance where I'm going back and forth between writing and painting. So eventually I'd like to get back to that and have the next book be written at a more leisurely pace while I'm still able to paint. Yeah.
Did you set up the writing of the book before, you worked with Inner Traditions and set up this deal before you actually completed the books? I
mean, there was a lot that was completed when I got the deal with them. But I just have a tendency to want to expand and go deeper. And so I made them into bigger projects than they initially were and took them in new directions, not entirely new, but, I just went deeper with some of the ideas. And after getting the publishing deal. So there was definitely, pressure of the deadlines and stuff, but
So you had both the books were finished as one unit?
Originally, it was one book.
Oh, wow.
Mm-hmm. And they thought it would be better as two. So I could pretty easily see how they could be divided. And so I did that. Yeah.
Very cool. Well, it's awesome that you have the built-in audience from your art to go to the book first, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that should help a lot with the sales and with the marketing process, right?
Yeah, I think so. And there's a lot of my art in the books too, which I think people will be excited about.
Right. Yeah, I love that. It's actually, would you mind talking about a couple of the pieces?
Oh, sure.
It's just, all right. The transfiguration of Thoth.
Yes.
Could you go through, if you recall, the process of creating that, and to whatever extent you're comfortable with, explain what the painting is about?
Yeah. Oof, that was a powerful transmission. It really was. I was living in Olympia and really deep in my alchemical practice and studies. And I knew that I wanted to paint a depiction of Thoth, or Mercurius, this figure, Hermes Trismegistus. I wanted to honor this figure that is the patron deity of Hermeticism. And I had all these sketches that I did where it's very classical, but I wanted it to center around the lake in Olympia, the Capitol Lake. And so if you see that painting, there's the lake, and you can see the Capitol building in the background, and which is based on, ancient Greek architecture. And I just, even though it's a legislative building and all of that, like it symbolized something for me. So I wanted to have that in the painting. And I spent a lot of time walking around the lake and up around the Capitol grounds in Olympia and doing these sort of hermetic meditative walks and receiving inspiration and watching the clouds and the reflections in the water. And
what year was this?
This would have been 2018.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's kind of where I was and where my mind was as I was gestating the idea for this painting. And I had a big canvas that I knew I was going to do it on. And there was a lunar eclipse, a solar eclipse, sorry. And we had very good visibility in Olympia. So I was with some friends and we watched the eclipse, and I was I felt so charged and so connected to something numinous and magical. And after we watched the eclipse, I just ran to my studio and picked up the charcoal and just kind of went at it on the canvas. And this transmission came through that was completely different from what I had conceptualized in any of my sketches. It was very surprising. And to me, it seemed awkward and didn't quite understand it. But I was like, all right, this is what's coming through. So this is what I'm going to work with. And what came through first was the beak of the ibis and the head of the crocodile and sort of the positioning of the arm. And so that to me, I was just like, wow, this is really just kind of awkward, but I'm going to go with it. And I started just, developing the painting bit by bit. And that's how it was born. But I think a lot of my paintings, they often will line up with these celestial events. And those events will correspond with the energies that I'm working with on a planetary level. So I find that fascinating. And sometimes it's intentional, but oftentimes it's not. And it'll just take me by surprise, And I find those to be the most powerful, fascinating paintings. They feel like they're ensouled, like they have a life of their own and a purpose of their own that's beyond anything I could conceive of. So
I remember that eclipse. I was in Olympia during that eclipse. I remember that.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So it's kind of cool. As you're telling the story, I was able to really put myself there and be like, wow, man, that's really neat. Like thinking of myself being there, and like Seven was out there somewhere with this stuff happening. That's really cool. What was the frog in the alligator's mouth? What's the frog?
Well, it's a black toad.
Okay.
The black toad in alchemy is a symbol for the primal matter, the prima materia, or the beginning material that we work with. And the prima materia is like the undifferentiated consciousness that precedes all of creation, where all of the elements are kind of in a state of chaos, just undifferentiated. There's no polarity. There's no differentiation between anything. And as things emerge from that, that's where we get the elements and the active and passive principles of energy, and all of that emerges from this state of undifferentiated consciousness. So the black toad is a symbol of that, and also a symbol of beginnings. And the way I see it is it's escaping, because Thoth is piercing through the scales of the crocodile and transmuting this lower sort of reptilian energy. That beginning material is able to emerge, to escape from the jaws of death and to be reborn into something else. That's a little bit of how I see it.
All right. The death of the profane.
That one, I was in a period of wanting to portray the chakras of the human esoteric anatomy. And so I was really thinking about the upper chakras of the throat, the third eye, and the crown. But it came to encompass so much more than that. And really, to me, it's about letting go in all the little deaths of life, not physical death, but just all those little times when we have to let go of something dear and precious to us. And when we have to change, when we're sort of pushed into being changed, and learning how to accept that and embrace it with a certain level of grace. And also letting go of all the sort of profane things that don't serve us on our path. And being familiar with death, being familiar with transformation and change, and not being afraid of it, being able to look it in the face, just like the skull is kind of looking right at you, and embracing it as a necessary part of life. I think in this culture, we're very, very afraid of death, and we tend to push it away. And it's really just transformation, and it's happening all the time, all around us. And it's a beautiful thing. And even though it's scary and it's the unknown and all of that, but when we can embrace it and accept it, it really opens things up in life. And everything comes from death. Birth and death are united in one endless relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Can't separate them.
It kind of goes back to the inciting incident for your own artistic practice, right? When you went through that dark night of the soul, and you were learning how to paint, and you started playing with the alchemical ideas.
Mm-hmm.
All right. I could ask you about every single one of your works of art, but neither one of us has infinite time, and I'm sure you do not have infinite time. So the last one I want to ask about, the Crossroads in the Garden of Venus.
Yeah, this is an interesting one. I was working through some pretty heavy relationship issues, some shadow work relating to Venus for myself. And, to give some context, I have Venus conjunct Saturn and Scorpio in my chart. So it can be a little bit heavy and intense sometimes. And at the time, I was like really in it and really wanting to transmute some of these shadow aspects into their higher expressions. And so that was the spirit of that painting. But at the same time, anytime I'm working through my own personal stuff, I also want it to be accessible to other people and to sort of like convey a universal message, So I want to be able to access both of those things, the personal transformation, but also, helping other people. So that was kind of my thought process with that one. But it was a combination of knowing what I wanted to paint and also allowing things to come through spontaneously. So I knew that I wanted to portray Venus as a goat because, Venus is the morning star, who's sometimes called Lucifer, the light bearer. And as such, she rises before the sun, before the dawn, and she sort of beckons us, draws us out of the dark night of the soul into the daylight, And at the same time as the evening star, Venus draws us into the dark night of the soul. So she has this dual aspect of the morning and evening star, and both drawing us into the sort of dark, what might be melancholic or depressive, or just, these stages of life where we really need to reflect and go through the underworld journey, So she brings us into that, but she also shows us how to find the way out back into the light. And so I wanted to portray her as this sort of angelic goat. And I think some people will look at that and they automatically think of like Capricorn and Saturn, but and that's fine. I think that's definitely an aspect that's there, but it was inspired by Venus originally. And so in the painting, the goat is sort of this central figure who is, on the one hand, pointing the way to the garden of life, and there's all the elements interacting in the garden of life. And behind the goat, it's sort of blocking this path that goes out into the stars. And in the background, a lot of people wouldn't know this, but it's the tail of the Scorpio constellation. So thinking that sort of like venomous scorpionic energy. And that's one path we can take, is towards this sort of, it's redemptive ultimately, but it's, we have to go through that sort of transmutation that the venom within us kind of promulgates. And then the spontaneous aspect really came through in everything else that appears on the altar around the goat. So on the right hand of the painting, you've got these like 7 figures that represent the 7 planets, but those came through very spontaneously. It was just, just marks with the brush. And all of a sudden I'm seeing these 7 figures, and same with the figs and all of the garden on the left-hand side. And so it was one of the first paintings where I really allowed things to just happen without planning them ahead of time. And that was really exciting to me and surprising. And as it all came together, I really wanted to encapsulate this Venusian energy. And so the symbols that you see on the altar cloth are all related to Venus. And I even did some magical ritual work to infuse the painting with specific magical intentions, which I won't get into, but you can see that sort of portrayed in there's like a, on the altar, you can see that. But,
Man, that's amazing. That definitely adds to my appreciation of the artworks. So, all right, my final question would be simply: you're talking to people, you want them to read your book. What would you say is the thing that you most would want them to get out of it, and the thing that you most think they would get out of it?
Well, I think what I most want people to get out of it is just a more expanded view of reality and consciousness, and understanding that there are so many ways that we can interact with these planetary energies, and understanding them as parts of ourselves to be explored, to be integrated. And I would hope that people feel that when they finish the book, that they feel more creatively inspired and magically inspired to work with these energies in their own life, in their own way.
All right. Well, thank you very much for your time, Seven. This has been a great discussion. I really appreciate it. The last thing. What other projects do you have? You have the 2023 book to announce, but what else do you have going on that you would like to share?
Well, you can find me online if you want to see more of my work. And I have a website, and it's just Marlene7Bremner.com. And maybe you can have a link to that.
I will. I'll have all your stuff linked in that panel below the video. Yeah.
Great. And I'm on Instagram, so that's a great place to keep up with what I'm doing and any projects that I have going on. And that's at M7 artist. M7 artist. And I also have a Patreon, and that's where I like to give people sneak peeks of new things that I'm working on. I post artistic visions of completed paintings for folks. At certain tiers, you can get mailings of cards with my original art on them, and more beyond that. So that's a great way to get in touch and follow my work and support what I'm doing if you want to do that. And maybe you can have a link to that as well. And
of course.
Currently I have one major painting in progress, and I just recently posted a little sneak peek of that on Instagram for folks. And I'm very excited about that one. And beyond that, I know there will be other books, but it's going to be some time. And I also get the teaching. So, but that might be some time too in the future. I'm just happy to be painting and being in my creative flow at the moment. So.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you very much, Seven, and best of luck with the book. I hope you sell thousands, if not millions. I hope it goes really well. Sincerely.
Oh, thank you so much, Jeff. It's been a pleasure talking to you.